Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you.
Just so you know, on this show, we work harder, not smarter. Oh, wait, maybe I have that backwards.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. I'm the Bill Arnold part of that short sentence. Thanks for tuning in today. I could spend the rest of my life in the book of Genesis. That's how much I love it. And whenever I get a chance to talk Genesis, I always take full advantage of that opportunity. And I'm going to get a chance to do it with Dr. David T. Lamb today. He's the McCrae Professor of Old Testament, the Dean of the Faculty. And we are looking forward to going through a number of parts of Genesis today, and we're going to focus a little bit on Abraham, which I'm looking forward to. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bill, it's great to be with you.
Thanks.
I think I need to say this is the first time I've been on your show on July 7th, so this is a new thing for me, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Do you have a very fond summer memory when you were a kid?
Wow. I played a lot of tennis.
Oh, cool.
And I grew up in Iowa, and it was hot.
Yes.
And so I won't talk about walking beans or detasseling corn. Those were less fond memories.
Yeah.
But I love to play tennis, and I spent a lot of my summers playing tennis. So that was a blast.
Nice. Did you ever say anything dumb enough to your parents like, I'm bored? Because I remember saying that to my mom once, and she said, well, why don't you go clean the garage? It's like, well, I'm not that bored.
I'm not that bored. I'm sure I said a lot of dumb things to my parents, but gosh, let's see. Yeah, I mean, we did this. We had this similar conversation. I'm bored. Yeah, why don't you go vacuum the living room?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'll shut up. I won't complain.
Well, I love that you're a tennis player, and that is a great sport you can play your whole life. And right now, I've been watching a little bit of Wimbledon, and boy, is that good. Been good tennis.
We have a pickleball court in our driveway, so I painted it on our driveway, and so I play more pickleball these days.
Okay.
And it's probably a little better for those of us who are getting older.
Yeah. Well, I meant what I said. I could spend the rest of my life studying Genesis. There's so much in it, and I love that we're going to talk about Abraham today. And let's get started, David. So Abraham just kind of seems to come out of the blue in Genesis 12. Where did he come from?
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a little strange. I'm sorry, a little strange. He just kind of arrives out of nowhere. But if we keep reading back to Genesis 1, we find that we can trace Abraham's genealogy. And he is actually a descendant of Noah, as is, according to the Bible, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But we keep going further back. Abram is actually a descendant of Adam, as is everybody according to the Bible. And we all need to remember that, God breathed the breath of life into Adam. And so, there's a way that we can kind of trace Abraham back through Noah, back through Adam, back to connection to God back in Genesis 1. I think that's pretty cool. We also know from chapter 11, well, that, his father is Terah, and Terah's family was already planning to go to Canaan, but then they got stopped and got stuck in the land of Haran.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a little bit of background, but it is kind of strange that God just decides, I'm going to pick this guy, Abram.
Yeah.
And I'm going to work through him.
Yeah.
But it is kind of curious.
David, do you feel like we get an adequate introduction to Abraham? Because he's such a key player in this story.
Yeah, I mean, again, we find out other things about Abram from other parts of the Bible. We find out that he's from Ur of the Chaldees, and they worship his family worship other gods beforehand, but it does kind of set up the story well. Most of Abraham's story, if you pretty much Genesis 12 to like 23, 24, 25, focuses on the latter part of his life, kind of, age 75 and beyond. And for if you have some listeners in that age group, or maybe any of us who are, I'm in my mid 60s, any of us are in that age group as well. It's kind of cool that God just decides, you know what, I'm not going to tell the story about, a lot of the disciples may have been called to follow Jesus when they were, some of them probably in their teens, maybe a lot of them in their 20s. We find a lot of stories in the Bible about people young. But this is a story about an old guy
Mm-hmm.
that God works through in some pretty dramatic ways. And I think that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. When does the shift come where he goes from Abram to Abraham? When is that?
Yeah.
When is that moment? And what should we be referring to him when we call him?
Yeah.
Should we be calling him Abraham or Abram?
Yeah. For the sake of simplicity, whenever I teach Genesis, I just tell people, you can call him whatever you want. His name gets changed in chapter 17.
Okay.
But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call him Abram in this interview. I won't distinguish between stories from the first few chapters and stories from the later chapters. His name, his initial name, Abram, just means exalted father, which sounds great. And then there's this little HA in English that gets inserted in the middle of the name. And it's hard to know exactly what that is supposed to mean in the Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
But the text explains it to us that it just means that his name means father of a multitude. Okay, it's kind of hard to get that clearly from the Hebrew, but the text makes it clear so we don't have to worry about too much. But I mean, the irony here is even when, in chapter 12 and in chapter 17, whether he's exalted father or father of a multitude, he's not a father yet. Although he does become a father through Hagar. Maybe we talk about that a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Hagar of Ishmael. But for most of this story, he's not a father at all. So there's kind of an irony there in his name, which kind of pushes into some of the tension. That's going to be a big tension as we kind of follow through Abram's story.
Mm-hmm. David, would anyone live today with the kind of trust that Abraham had? Because when God says, I'm going to send you out, Abraham kind of said, well, where? And God says, well, I'll tell you later. Just go. And then God says, well, I'll give you some land. And Abraham was like, great, where? Well, I'll tell you later. Just wander.
Yeah.
And then
it's like when your kids are young and you say, we're going to go on a road trip, they probably just say, okay. But as your kids get older, maybe teens or something, where are we going?
Yeah.
And Abram doesn't really get that. It's like, so again, Genesis 12 now, God comes along and says, hey, I'm going to take you to this new place. Well, where? Well, we'll find out.
Yeah.
So,
and then I'll give you a child, and it's like, well, how? And God says, well, I'll tell you later. Just wait.
Yeah. Yeah. And the child thing is, God makes that promise to him on multiple occasions,
mm-hmm.
but there's not a lot of clarity about that. There's just a lot of kind of waiting and trusting. Again, waiting and trusting is a big theme for people in the Bible. Abram had to wait for a son. Joseph had to wait for his dreams to be fulfilled. Jacob had to wait for a wife. The people of Israel had to wait for deliverance from Egypt for centuries. And so, if any of your listeners out there are waiting for something to happen, yeah, you're in good company.
Yeah, no
And
kidding.
the great thing about waiting is it forces us to be dependent upon God. Hopefully, it'll motivate us to pray, but kind of to be looking to God. And as we read through Abraham's story, he cried out to God a lot and was clearly waiting on God. And that's although he had a couple problems along the way, but
Yeah.
he was a man of great faith.
And then, miracle of miracles, a son is born. I mean, he's an old man. He's like 100 when Isaac is born. And then God says, "Now I want you to sacrifice your child." And
Yeah.
Abraham says, "Why?" And God's like, "Well, I'll tell you later." It's like, this is incredible. This is the most amazing trust and faith this is one of the best. In my personal opinion, this is one of the top.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he kind of struggles at a couple points along the way. But in chapter 22, God says, yeah, you need this child, this precious son that you've been waiting for a long time, you need to sacrifice him. And wow, I just can't imagine. It's like I can't imagine what it was like for him to talk to Sarah about this. Hey, I'm getting up early. Isaac and I are going to go on a little trip tomorrow. What are you going to do, honey? So
Yeah.
But that would be an awkward conversation. But he gets up early the next day and goes, and God guides him. And
David, the fact Scripture says he got up early the next day. It's like, would you have slept that night?
No,
I wouldn't have either.
No, there's no way.
Yeah.
And we don't know what he was doing. I wouldn't be surprised if he would have been praying. And we see him interacting with God in some other big ways along, through his narrative. He's kind of, in chapter 15, he kind of struggles and asks God, why don't I have a son? And now the son has come along, and God tells him to sacrifice the son. That's just, I mean, it's troubling. Actually, I've had people that my wife's cousin came up to me one time, and now he's not a person of faith, but he was just like, David, why would God do this to one of his followers? And it's just a really troubling story.
Yeah. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because I do want to go back to God's call to Abraham. And in a way, I mean, what is he, 75? And he is
about 75. Yeah.
Yeah. It almost seems a little cruel, because he's asking Abraham to leave everything behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does seem cruel, leave your country. Just again, Genesis 12, your country, your kindred, and your father's house, go to this land that I'll tell you later.
Right.
We think, I mean, the trip was maybe a couple hundred miles. It's hard to know exactly. We have a rough idea of where Haran is, but now we think, a couple hundred miles, no problem. We'll just jump in the car, put the kids in the SUV or whatever we've got, a van. But back then, a trip of a couple hundred miles, maybe 500 miles even, that could take months easily, because your family, his limited family, and his livestock, his animals. So this was a big deal. This would be like moving to a different continent for someone from the Midwest, move to a different continent. The thing I like to think of, though, is this reminds me a little bit of Luke 14, when Jesus talks about the cost of discipleship, that, Jesus says we have to hate our family. We got to lose our life. Anybody that tells us it isn't on some level costly to follow Jesus needs to reread the Gospels. For Abram, the call was costly to leave all these things behind. God wanted Abram to be in a place of dependence on him.
Mm-hmm.
But then notice what God says, and I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through you. And I think the beautiful thing here is this blessing. We can trace this blessing when God blessed the first humans in Genesis 1. And then he says, hey, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. God wanted his image bearers to fill the earth. And he's kind of laying out the plan now in Genesis 12. And then all the families of the earth are going to get blessed through Abraham. Well, Matthew 1 starts out and talks about Jesus, the descendant, the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was this descendant of Abraham that God was going to bless all the families of the earth through. And then that's how Matthew's gospel begins. And then Matthew's gospel ends with the Great Commission, make disciples of all nations. So it's Matthew 28 is almost a paraphrase of the first commission to the first humans in Genesis 1, that we see kind of a version of this in the call to Abraham. I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through you. And that's just a beautiful call to be involved in God's mission. And that's where God wants us to go. And I think it's amazing, it's costly, but God has a big plan, and it's pretty exciting.
No, it is absolutely exciting. Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're going to continue our discussion of Abraham in Genesis after just a short break. If you have a question or a comment regarding our conversation, let me know what it is and send it over on the text line, 877-933-2484. Wyatt will have us back in 90 seconds.
Welcome is a word said universally all over the world. Every language on the planet has their own way of making a friendly greeting. At Faith Radio, when we welcome, we really mean it. Learn more about us by requesting a free welcome pack gift. Text the word welcome to 877-933-2484 or visit myfaithradio.com to request your welcome pack today. And a warm welcome to you.
I'm back with Dr. David T. Lamb. We're talking about Abraham in Genesis. Great start, David. Let's pick up the whole time now when Abraham travels to Egypt. And now he's doing some things that we think, it's a little questionable.
Yeah, what's up with that? So there, Egypt had the Nile River. I think most of you guys know that. So that allowed Egypt to always pretty much have crops because the Nile just never dried up.
Mm-hmm.
But Israel had more problems geographically. The Jordan was a great river, but not nearly as big as the Nile. And so there was a famine. And he's like, okay, let's go to Egypt because they've got food over there. This is kind of a big theme in the Old Testament. But he's like, okay, just tell everybody. Because, Sarah was beautiful, which is, wonderful. And she's 10 years younger. So, at the beginning of Genesis 12, Abraham was 75 and she was 65. So, I don't know. That's fantastic. Good for her. But he's like, just tell people you're my sister so they won't kill me.
Yeah, and take you.
And take you. And, take you and make you, Pharaoh's wife. Presumably here. And good for Abraham. He knew what was going to happen. Now, technically, they were half sisters, but the problem with this is, because they shared one parent, but only one parent, and so technically, really. More than his sister, she was really his wife. That was the primary thing that characterized them. So now some people, when I teach on this with my students, and sometimes you read commentaries, people are kind of trying to defend Abraham's behavior, and I understand that. But I view what Abram did here as pretty bad. Basically lying about his wife. I mean, how would Sarah feel? It's like, hey, I'm gonna throw you under the bus here, but we're trying to keep me safe, right? It's like this is the opposite of chivalry, right? And but she does it. And Pharaoh takes her into his harem, and it's hard to know exactly what happened, but and then Abraham gets really rich. The Pharaoh gives him all these things, animals and female slaves. Now we're going to come back to that one later on, but God still protected him. Abraham does not trust God here. God says, "Hey, I've got a great plan for you." Abraham could have said, "God's got a great plan for me. He's got to be able to protect me. I need to be able to I need to have integrity." But he doesn't. But God still works through this whole situation and delivers them. But the reason I don't have a problem saying, hey, what Abraham did here was not good, is the Bible is full of messed up stories of messed up people
No
who
kidding.
need grace. Even Abraham, the forefather of faith, struggled at times. And again, if we talk about the heroes of the Old Testament or the heroes of the New Testament with, as saints that never struggled, then those of us who struggle with sin, and I'm raising my hand right now, those of us who struggle with sin may not be able to identify with that. But for those of us who, like Abraham here, or maybe Moses later, or maybe David later, or Peter later, struggled with sin and trusting God, to be able to talk about the ways they struggle, I think is going to speak to the people in our churches, our ministries, our Sunday school classes, our families who struggle to trust God sometimes, because that it is a struggle.
Mm-hmm. David, let's talk a little bit about Lot. Didn't Lot just cause trouble for Abraham? And then why did Abraham bring Lot with him?
Yeah, he was supposed to leave his family behind. Whenever I teach this, students like, hey, should Lot have been taken with? Should Lot have been left behind? Because Lot is Abram's nephew.
Right.
Okay, so the son of his brother. And so I asked the class, well, what do you guys think? And I would love to hear what, if any of you listeners have some thoughts about this, whatever, contact Bill here and let him know what your questions are. But in chapter 13, there are tensions between Lot's herdsmen and Abram's herdsmen.
Yeah.
And in chapter 14, Lot gets kind of captured in this battle between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And chapter 14 is a little bit confusing. We probably won't talk about it too much, but Lot gets captured. Abram has to kind of rescue him. And then later on, chapter 18 and 19, Lot is part of Sodom, and they're wicked, and Abram ends up kind of advocating or praying for the people of Sodom, including Lot. But I don't know. I think Lot was kind of like his adopted son. He doesn't have a son, and Lot doesn't have a father. And it's possible that he viewed Lot as kind of a, if I never have a son, I'll just make, Lot my descendant. So it might have been just another way he wasn't trusting God. But the text isn't clear. And so I tell my students, hey, when you teach the Bible, don't make things up.
Amen.
So when the Bible's not clear, and we're speculating, it's okay to speculate, but just say, hey, I'm speculating here, so I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. David, let's talk about Melchizedek. This is always a big one. People always like this discussion.
Yeah, what's up with Melchizedek? This guy kind of just shows up out of nowhere. In Hebrew, we might say Melchizedek, which literally means my king is righteous. That's kind of a cool name, like King Melchizedek. Um, he does literally. So there's this battle, and Abraham kind of it comes to the rescue to deliver the people of Sodom, which includes his nephew Lot. And afterwards, the priest of the Most High, King of Salem, shows up and blesses Abraham. And it's hard to know exactly why he does it, but I think he blesses Abraham because Abraham kind of risked his life, went to battle for these people, including his nephew, and he blesses Abraham, which that blessing goes back to Genesis 12.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it goes back to Genesis 1. The very first thing God does to the humans is bless them. God says, I'm going to bless you and I'm going to make your name great, and all the families are going to be, the earth are going to be blessed through you. And this Melchizedek comes along and blesses him. And Abraham, we don't know, kind of the way I talk about it is Melchizedek does not come from the same denomination as Abraham.
Okay.
Because he's a priest of El Elyon, the God Most High. But, I'm sure, presumably, all of your listeners know someone from a different church or a different denomination. Abraham was able to get along with this person that came from maybe a little bit of a different faith tradition. They shared a common faith in God. And so Abram gives him a tithe. And I think that's beautiful. Do we get along with Christians from other churches? Well, Abraham did.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, Melchizedek shows up a couple other places in the Bible, not a lot. But he shows up in Psalm 110. God says, you're a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And the author of Hebrews in chapter 5, 6, and 7 talks about Jesus in the priestly order of Melchizedek. Now, in the Bible, priests came from the tribe of Levi, the Levitical priesthood. But Jesus was a priest of a different order, according to Psalm 110 and Hebrews 5, 6, and 7. And so this guy, Melchizedek, kind of a mysterious character, shows up particularly in the book of Hebrews and is connected to Jesus, who kind of advocates on our behalf, like a priest, mediates, helps us get reconciled with God in the same way that Melchizedek helped Abram connect to God. And it's just a beautiful story, although he is kind of a mysterious character.
Yeah. David, what is the significance of Melchizedek bringing bread and wine to Abraham after Abraham's victory in battle?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's fascinating, and a lot of people really see a kind of a foreshadowing or maybe a precursor
Mm-hmm.
to the Lord's Supper, to communion, the Eucharist, whatever your tradition calls it. But, it's the bread and the wine, and it kind of sets us up for, it's really Jesus's Last Supper, which was in the original context, was a celebration of Passover. And on one level, though, bread and wine that's kind of what people ate. It's like, I don't know if you Coke and pizza. I don't know what is it.
Yeah.
That, most American, or a hamburger and fries. You go to your fast food place where you get. So bread and wine is kind of a pretty common meal, but it does pretty clearly kind of point forward to Jesus, maybe pointing forward a little bit closer, perhaps, to the Passover in Exodus 12, but maybe more dramatically for those of us who are Christians, to Jesus's Last Supper, which we celebrate whenever we take communion.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
And do we see Melchizedek as God's teaching us that there's a perfect priest that has long
Yeah.
existed before anybody.
Yeah, going way. And where does this guy come from?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't know.
There's no lineage. There's nothing.
Yeah, and Hebrews kind of, emphasize if this is something you're interested, read Hebrews 5, 6, and 7, and particularly chapter 7. There's going to be a lot of great stuff there about Melchizedek. But yeah, he comes out of nowhere, and but we see this connection. He bringing in the bread and wine, and kind of sets us up for Jesus, who is a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
And it's a great story.
It is so interesting. We're going to take a little break and come right back with Dr. David T. Lamb. You can go learn more about David at his website, davidtlamb, LAMB.com. We'll be right back in just a minute. My guest today is Dr. David T. Lamb, and we're talking about Abraham in Genesis. All right, David, let's get to the covenant-making part of Genesis. I think that shows up in like chapter 15, and God established a covenant with Abraham. And talk about why that is so important.
Yeah, covenants are kind of a big deal in the Bible. I mean, some people, we talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament, but, depending on which, translation you've got kind of going back, it's really kind of the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. God establishes a covenant with Noah in chapter, 8 and 9 of Genesis. There's a covenant with Moses. Some people call the promise to David a covenant to David, and there are kind of other covenants as well, other places. But this is a big deal in Genesis 15. God says to him, kind of reaches out and says, "Hey, I'm gonna, things are going to be great for you. You're going to have a lot of children." And Abram, I love it. Abram pushes back. He's like, "Hey, I don't have a child yet. You say you're going to give me offspring, but I don't have a child yet." And then God says, "Okay, let's go outside. Let's take this outside. Okay, look at the stars. Let's look at the stars. Okay, why don't you start counting those? I don't know. Have you ever done that? You just kind of go out. Maybe summer's not as good a time because it gets dark later. But in the winter and maybe in the fall, go outside and start counting those stars." So that might have taken a little bit of time for Abraham. It's like, okay, if you can count those stars, and I have a son who's an astronomer. He's got a PhD and he teaches astronomy basically. But literally billions, okay, billions of stars. Well, that's how many of your descendants you're going to have, Abram. And then at that point in time, the text says, Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Now that should sound pretty familiar to a lot of people.
It is.
Because Paul talks about that in Romans 4 and in Galatians 3, and James talks about that in chapter 2. So this God, Abraham believed God, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. I mean, at some level, it's kind of the encapsulation of the gospel. We put our faith in God, our faith in Jesus, and God redeems us and restores to us and declares us righteous. It's really this beautiful image of faith right here. And then God says, let's kind of make this a little bit more concrete with a covenant. And God starts to tell Abraham what's going to happen. And this is where it gets a little complicated. God tells him, "Oh, by the way, your descendants are going to be slaves for hundreds of years." And I'm like, wait a minute. My descendants are going to be slaves for hundreds of years. But then God says, "Yeah, and then I'm going to bring them back. I'm going to deliver them." But this is a long ways in the future. But so this is going to be. It's going to be hard. But the thing I love about what God says here is God doesn't promise that it's just going to be easy. Jesus didn't promise that following him is going to be easy. God told Abraham in chapter 12, yeah, it's going to be costly. Um, but I am going to continue to bless you and I will be with you. And then God does this kind of smoking pot thing, which is a little bit weird. He makes Abram fall asleep, and then he kind of shows him this vision. And a lot of people think that maybe God was kind of he was making an appearance there in this vision. It's kind of a weird image. So we're not 100% certain what happens there, but God is saying, I'm gonna give you descendants. I'm gonna give you this land, and yeah, it's gonna be hard because they're gonna be slaves for a while, but I'm gonna bring them back here. And the amazing thing is, Abraham believed him, and Paul and James kind of play on that theme later. That this is a powerful image of faith for Abram, and again, Abraham, the forefather of faith, gets us off to a great start here.
Okay, David, if Abraham is believing God for this in chapter 15, why does Abraham then sleep with Hagar in chapter 16? Seems like what happened? There's not.
Yeah. And again, you see this a little bit. I mean, almost with the disciples, right? They leave their nets and come follow Jesus, and they give up. They give up. Family on some level, maybe jobs on some level, and they follow Jesus. But then they struggle. They struggle to believe, and Jesus has to confront Peter and calls Peter Satan, because Peter seems to be kind of doubting that Jesus is going to need to suffer and die. So the story of the Bible is a story of saints who struggle, and just as Abraham had trouble in Egypt in chapter 12, he has trouble here when Sarah comes along and says, "Hey, just sleep with Hagar, my servant, and we'll get a child through her." That wasn't part of the plan. Now, that was common back then. And we learn about Jacob's two slave wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, later on in Genesis. So this was kind of a common thing. But just because it was common doesn't mean that it was right.
Right.
And we do know, the text of chapter 16, Genesis 16, talks about Hagar, the Egyptian slave. Well, it seems to be pretty obvious that where did they get Hagar, the Egyptian slave? Well, probably back in 12, when Pharaoh gave him female slaves. And so we kind of see this point of connection back to this other time that Abraham believed God in chapter 15, but he struggles here. And again, the story of the Bible is about people who struggle, and that's okay. And God continues to work through them. But we don't need to protect Abraham's reputation. The thing that for me that is really dramatic is, there's tension between Hagar and Sarah once Hagar becomes pregnant. And we could talk a little bit more about some of the textual issues there. But Hagar ends up running away. And God pursues Hagar in this moment of, vulnerability. You talk about someone who is kind of, marginalized, if you will. Hagar is single, she's foreign, she's a female, and she's pregnant. But what does God do? God pursues her. God is always looking after people who are oppressed, who are marginalized, and God speaks to her, and it's just this beautiful interaction. Now it's still a little bit kind of weird, but it's wonderful that she says, "I have seen God," in the midst of this kind of dramatic thing, and she returns and gives birth to Ishmael, Abram's first child, and God still is able to work through Ishmael and Ishmael's descendants. And again, God is always able to kind of redeem our mistakes.
Pretty special interaction that God had with Hagar. pretty
Yeah.
remarkable moment. And I think everyone
Yeah,
finds that to
I
be
love
inspiring.
that.
Yeah, I do too.
One time I was teaching. It's been interesting when I teach Genesis, and there are women in my class. I mean, sometimes I have more women. Often I have more men in my seminary courses. But it's interesting to see how many people want to write one of their in-depth academic papers on the story of Hagar, because it's just such a great story, and it's one that maybe we need to talk about a little bit more. But yeah, it's an amazing story. I love it.
I'm happy to talk about it a little bit more if you're ready to go.
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. Okay, so Hagar, um, I mean, it's interesting that that Sarah, there's there's something going on between Hagar and Sarah there. Um, Hagar maybe is a little bit, she's got some pride because she's now pregnant and Sarah can't get pregnant. It's hard to know exactly what's going on there. But then Sarah starts to really kind of abuse. And the word there in the Hebrew is really kind of a harsh, oppressive term, which causes Hagar to want to run away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be bad if an unmarried, pregnant young woman decides to leave this place that she's got, meals and food, and run out into the wilderness. It had to be bad. But again, in this moment of weakness, God pursues her, and God, I love it. God just starts asking her questions. Where are you going? What's going on? And and it's just this beautiful interaction of how the angel of God is speaking to her and giving her this message that she perceives as really a word of comfort in this moment of trial. Now, a moment of trial, and she does return. And even though the situation was not good there, it does make sense for her to return because she's provided for, and she probably would have just died in the wilderness. So, but God kind of led her to that and guided her back to a place that she can get taken care of.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a short break and be back with Dr. David T. Lamb. We're talking about Abraham in Genesis, and we'll be right back.
We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484, or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com.
Dave, I thought I would bring this up close to the end of the show because the question is about circumcision.
Yeah.
And why would God require circumcision as a sign of the covenant? And I mean, come on, Abraham's 99.
Yeah. It's troubling to me. This guy's 99. He's trying to, father a child, and circumcision may be a little complicated, to kind of figure out how that's going to work out. So, I mean, one thing we do need to say is the Israelites were not the only nation that circumcised people.
Okay.
But for a guy who's 99, wants to still become the father of a son, circumcision would be a risky move. It would take incredible faith. And just as it took incredible faith for Abraham to leave in Genesis 12, it takes incredible faith in Genesis 17 for Abraham to get circumcised. And it's going to take incredible faith in Genesis 22 for Abraham to offer to sacrifice Isaac. But I mean, again, Abraham struggled in Egypt and with Hagar, but these other times he was circumcised, and that's just amazing. I just think he just trusted God. And again, I don't know how long it might take, for a 99-year-old guy to recover from a circumcision. But a year later, Isaac is born. And again, I'm speculating a little bit here, but I think it would be reasonable for the first time that Sarah and Abraham to be intimate after his circumcision was when Sarah got pregnant. Again, I'm speculating here,
Right.
but I just think, how cool is that? He trusted God,
Yeah.
and God gives him Isaac a year later, and it's just amazing. And again, there's struggles for the people of God, but God often calls us to do risky things. I mean, God calls these people to go overseas and do missions. And, I don't know what God is calling you to do that's kind of risky right now, kind of caring for a neighbor, or giving money to your church, or giving whatever it is, to take a risk, to talk to somebody at your work about God or about Jesus. God is always calling his people to take risks, just as he did Abraham to get circumcised in Genesis 17. And if God's not, we need to be sensitive to God's Spirit, to obey the kind of wild, risky things that God calls us to. It's just an amazing story.
Mm-hmm. If we don't talk about God at work, I think we get fired here. Isn't that true, Wyatt?
Last time I checked, yeah.
That's it. Then we get let go. That's the whole plan. All right. We don't have a lot of time left, Dave, but I want to ask you about in Genesis 18, the Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. And he looked up and saw 3 men standing by. So who did Abraham think he was hosting? Put on a little meal? What was he thinking?
To know. Yeah, I mean, we're not 100% certain. Some people see kind of the Trinity here. I think that might be a little bit speculative.
Okay.
But again, I tell my students, don't make things up. But in any case, he wanted to show hospitality to these guys. And hospitality is a huge deal, both in 18, and we're going to see that in chapter 19. And he wanted to kind of celebrate with them and be together and kind of show hospitality. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, he knows that something is special with at least one of these people, one of his guests. And they end up kind of having this longer conversation in the second half of chapter 18. But it's hard to know exactly what he was thinking. But he was thinking, I need to show hospitality to these people. Mm-hmm. And that's great.
Mm-hmm. As we've chatted about the life of Abraham in Genesis, Dave, can we talk about how the life of Abraham absolutely points to Jesus?
Yeah, definitely. And whenever we talk about these Old Testament characters, we got to be seeing kind of points of connection. So I've tried to drop in a few along the way, but I realize not everybody's may have been here for the whole show, the whole hour. But Abraham shows up. One of the very first names in the Gospel of Matthew, right? That the genealogy of Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. So this plan that God has, I would say, going back to Genesis 1, going to Genesis 12, for God to do something through Abraham, we see that in its fruition with Jesus, the plan that God is kind of creating a covenant people, and the plan of Jesus. So Abraham kind of points forward to us there. Obviously, Paul and James both talk about Abraham's faith. Again, Abraham didn't really believe in Jesus, but he believed in God, and that kind of points us forward to the way that Jesus kind of sets us up and then the other thing that we've talked about is Abraham's story talks a lot about costly obedience, which again I think sets us up with Luke 14, the cost of discipleship, when Jesus was always talking about what does it mean to follow him. If you don't hate your family, etc., you can't be my disciple. And so I think there are a variety of ways that Abraham kind of points us to Jesus, and we just kind of trace that story through the rest of the Old Testament and certainly throughout the New Testament as well.
Thank you, David, so much for doing the show today. It's always a delight.
It's been my pleasure.
You bet. Dr. David T. Lamb has been my guest. Go to his website, davidtlamb.com. You can learn more about David. His most recent book is The Emotions of God. It's one you will like. All right, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to continue our study with Bible teacher Jeff Berdorn. Be right back.
Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.